It was a quiet and peaceful night in a small countryside town. The stars were shining brightly and the sound of crickets filled the air. A young man named Ethan was sitting on the porch of his wooden house enjoying the cool breeze after a long day. He lived alone near the forest, far from the noise of the city. He loved watching the stars. It was his way to relax. But that night, something unusual caught his eyes. A bright light suddenly flashed across the sky. It wasn't like a normal shooting star, it was brighter, faster, and it seemed to be falling, not flying. Ethan stood up quickly, squinting his eyes. The light streaked downward, leaving a trail of silver smoke behind. Then a small explosion echoed from the direction of the forest. The ground shook slightly under his feet. What was that? Ethan whispered to himself, heart pounding. He grabbed a flashlight and decided to check. He had always been curious about strange things, and this was definitely strange. He walked through the tall grass, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The deeper he went into the woods, the more he could smell something burnt, like metal and smoke. After a few minutes, he saw a small crater glowing faintly in the ground. When he moved closer, he froze. Inside the crater was a small metallic capsule, about the size of a backpack. It was smoking and sparking in some places. Ethan hesitated. It looked like some kind of machine, but not one he had ever seen before. Then he heard a tiny sound, almost like a whimper. He leaned closer and saw movement inside the capsule. His eyes widened. There, sitting weakly inside, was the smallest creature he had ever seen. She was no bigger than his hand. Her skin was smooth and pale blue, and her large dark eyes glowed softly. 2 little silver markings ran across her forehead, and her clothes looked like something out of a science fiction movie, made of thin, shining material. She looked frightened, trembling as she tried to crawl out of the broken capsule. Ethan, still shocked, took a step back. "What in the world?" he muttered under his breath. The tiny creature noticed him and froze. Her big eyes went wide with fear. She let out a sharp sound, something between a squeak and a word in a language he didn't understand. Then she tried to hide behind a piece of metal, pressing herself into the dirt. Ethan slowly raised his hands to show he meant no harm. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly. But of course, she couldn't understand his words. To her, his voice was loud and strange, his size enormous and frightening. She looked at him like a person might look at a giant monster. The small alien girl shook her head quickly and pointed at him, mumbling something in her language. Her tone sounded scared and desperate. Then she covered her head with her little arms as if expecting him to attack. Ethan felt a mix of confusion and sympathy. She was so small, so helpless, and clearly terrified. He took a deep breath and crouched down slowly, keeping his distance. He looked around and found that her tiny capsule was cracked open, wires hanging loose, smoke rising from it. Whatever this thing was, it had crash-landed hard. He noticed she was clutching her stomach. Maybe she was hungry or hurt. "You're not from here, are you?" Ethan said quietly, even though he knew she wouldn't answer. The little alien peeked from behind the metal, her eyes darting toward him. When he reached into his pocket to pull out his phone, she flinched again, thinking it might be a weapon. Her small body shook and she made a fearful noise. Ethan stopped immediately. Okay. No phone," he said softly, putting it away. He didn't want to scare her more than she already was. Then he thought for a moment. Maybe she was hungry. Maybe that's why she looked so weak. Carefully, he stood up and took a few steps backward, trying to show he wasn't dangerous. Then he said, "Wait here." Though he knew she wouldn't understand. He hurried back to his house and grabbed a small piece of bread and a cup of water. When he returned to the crater, she was still there, hiding behind a rock. Her big eyes followed every move he made. Ethan placed the bread and water gently on the ground a few feet away from her. Then he stepped back again, giving her space. For a long time, nothing happened. The alien girl stared at the food suspiciously, her tiny head tilting. She sniffed the air, unsure. Ethan sat on the ground a few meters away, pretending not to watch. After a few minutes, her hunger got the better of her. Slowly, she crawled toward the bread, took a small piece, and bit it. Her eyes widened a little. It wasn't bad. She took another bite. Then another. Ethan smiled. "See? Not so bad," he whispered. When she was done, she looked at him again, this time not as scared as before. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, though she was still cautious. Ethan noticed she was shivering, maybe from cold or fear. He gently took off his jacket and laid it near her like a blanket. She hesitated, then slowly touched it. The warmth comforted her. That night, Ethan stayed nearby, keeping an eye on her from a distance. He didn't sleep much. His mind was racing with questions. Who was she? Where did she come from? And how did she end up here? He had never believed in aliens, but now one was right in front of him, small enough to fit in his hand, yet real and alive. Before dawn, he saw her looking up at the sky. Her little face looked sad, her eyes fixed on the stars. She raised one hand toward the sky, whispering softly in her unknown language. Ethan realized she wasn't just lost, she was far from home. As the first light of morning spread across the forest, Ethan made a decision. He couldn't just leave her there. She needed help, shelter, and food. Maybe he couldn't fix her ship or send her home, but he could keep her safe. He looked at her and said softly, "Don't worry, little one. I'll help you." Of course, she didn't understand his words, but she looked at him for a long moment as if sensing something in his tone. Then slowly she nodded. For the first time, Ethan saw a tiny spark of trust in her eyes. She still didn't know what kind of creature he was, and deep inside she still feared he might one day harm her. In her mind, humans were unknown and unknown things were dangerous. She even thought maybe humans ate smaller creatures like her. But somehow this quiet young man with kind eyes felt different. That was the night everything began. The night a frightened mini-alien girl met a human who would change her world forever. The next morning, the forest was filled with the sound of birds singing. Sunlight passed softly through the trees, making golden patterns on the ground. Ethan woke up near the small crater, his back aching from sleeping on the cold ground. For a second, he thought maybe everything that happened last night was just a dream. But when he looked to the side, he saw the small alien girl curled up inside his jacket, sleeping peacefully. She looked calmer now. Her tiny face was relaxed, and her small hands were resting on her chest. Ethan smiled quietly. He still couldn't believe what he was seeing, a real living being from another world right there beside him. He stood up carefully, not wanting to wake her. He walked back to his house to get her something to eat. He found some fruit and a few crackers, thinking maybe she would like something sweet. When he returned, she was awake, sitting up and looking around nervously. The moment she saw him, she jumped back, her small wings, if they were wings, fluttering slightly. She looked ready to run, but Ethan quickly knelt down and held his hands open. "It's okay," he said softly. "I brought you food." He placed the fruit and crackers gently in front of her and moved a few steps away. The little alien tilted her head, studying him carefully. Her big eyes moved from his face to the food, then back again. After a few seconds, she reached forward and took a small piece of fruit. She sniffed it first, then took a bite. Her eyes brightened immediately. Ethan laughed lightly. "You like it?" She didn't understand the words, but she could feel the kindness in his tone. She gave a tiny nod and continued eating slowly, keeping one eye on him just in case. When she was finished, Ethan pointed at himself and said, "Ethan." He repeated it twice and then pointed again, smiling kindly. The little alien looked confused at first. Then she touched her chest and said, "Lyra." Her voice was soft and musical, with a tone that didn't sound human at all. "Lyra," Ethan repeated, trying to pronounce it the same way. She blinked in surprise and then smiled faintly. It was a small smile, but it made her face look even gentler. From that moment, something changed between them. The fear that had filled her eyes began to fade a little. She still stayed cautious, but now there was a little bit of trust. Ethan could feel it. During the day, he built a small shelter for her inside an old shoebox. He filled it with soft cotton and leaves so she could rest comfortably. He even made a tiny blanket from a handkerchief. When he placed it on the table and showed it to her, she stepped inside slowly, touching the walls with her little hands. She looked at him, her eyes wide with wonder. "You like it?" Ethan asked softly. Lyra gave a tiny nod and sat down inside, curling her legs under the blanket. For the first time, she looked safe. Ethan spent the rest of the day trying to communicate with her. He pointed at objects around the house and said their names. "Chair," he said, touching the chair. "Light," he said, pointing to the lamp. Lyra watched carefully and then tried to repeat some of the sounds, though her accent made them sound funny. When she said light in her tiny voice, Ethan couldn't help but laugh gently. She looked at him, confused at first, but then she laughed too. It was a soft, sweet laugh that filled the quiet room with warmth. As the days passed, they started to understand each other a little more. Lyra learned a few simple words like eat, water, and safe. Ethan learned that she used hand gestures and glowing symbols from a small device on her wrist to communicate complex ideas. She once showed him a hologram of her homeworld. It appeared in the air like a small floating image. Ethan saw shining cities, blue oceans, and strange flying creatures in the sky. "Beautiful," he whispered. Lyra nodded sadly. She touched her chest and then pointed up toward the stars, saying something softly in her language. Ethan understood her meaning even without words. She missed her home. That night, while Ethan cooked dinner, Lyra sat on the windowsill, staring at the dark sky. The stars were twinkling brightly, and she raised her hand as if trying to touch them. Ethan walked over and stood beside her. "You'll go home one day," he said quietly. "I'll help you." Lyra turned and looked at him. She couldn't understand everything he said, but she saw the kindness in his eyes. She smiled again, a little stronger this time. The days turned into weeks. Lyra began to explore Ethan's house like a curious child. She climbed onto bookshelves, hid behind pillows, and sometimes sat on the edge of his coffee cup, dipping her fingers in the water and giggling at the ripples. Ethan made sure she was always safe, and soon her fear of him completely disappeared. Sometimes she tried to teach him words from her language. The sounds were difficult. Some were soft hums, others almost like singing. Ethan tried his best, but his attempts made her laugh so hard she almost fell off the table. He laughed too, happy to see her so joyful. But Lyra was also thoughtful. She often stared at her broken capsule, which Ethan had brought inside for her. She would touch its cracked surface with sadness in her eyes. Ethan could see she wanted to fix it, but she didn't have the tools or energy. He promised himself he would find a way to help her, even if he didn't know how yet. One afternoon, Lyra walked up to him while he was working on his laptop. She tapped his finger to get his attention, and then pointed at a picture of people on the screen. She tilted her head as if asking something. Ethan smiled. "They're humans," he said, "people like me." Lyra looked at the screen again, then pointed at him and then at herself, shaking her head slightly. She seemed to be saying, "We are different." Ethan nodded slowly. "Yes, we are different," he said softly, "but maybe not too different." For a moment, they just looked at each other in silence. It was a peaceful, warm silence, the kind that doesn't need words. That night, while Ethan was reading, he noticed Lyra sitting quietly on his shoulder, watching the fireplace. The flames reflected in her eyes, making them glow softly. "Ethan," she said suddenly in her small voice. He turned his head, surprised. She had said his name perfectly. "Yes?" he said, smiling. She pointed at his chest and said, "Good." Then she pointed at herself and said, "Safe." Ethan felt his throat tighten a little. He didn't need any translation. Those two simple words meant everything. From that night on, they became like a small family. A human and a tiny alien girl who once thought he would eat her, now sharing food, laughter, and stories under the same roof. Ethan didn't know what the future would bring, but he knew one thing. Meeting Lyra had changed his life forever, and somewhere deep inside, he could feel that her story on Earth was only just beginning. Days passed, and Ethan and Lyra's strange friendship grew stronger with each sunrise. The little alien girl was no longer afraid of him. She had stopped hiding behind furniture, and now followed him around the house like a curious child. Every morning she would fly or hop onto the table while he made breakfast, watching every move he made with wide eyes. She loved watching the toaster. When the bread popped up suddenly, she always jumped a little and laughed. "Magic," she would say in her tiny voice, even though Ethan had already explained that it wasn't magic. It was just a machine. But to her, almost everything on Earth seemed magical. In return, Lyra started to show Ethan things from her world. She carried a small glowing device that had somehow survived the crash. When she touched it, tiny floating lights appeared in the air, forming pictures and shapes. One day, she showed Ethan a shining image of her planet, Valora. It was beautiful. The oceans were purple-blue, the trees silver, and the sky had two suns. Ethan watched in silence, amazed. "It's incredible," he whispered. Lyra smiled proudly, but then her expression turned sad. She pointed at the sky and said softly, "Home." Her voice trembled a little. Ethan understood what she meant. She missed her world deeply. He wished he could help her get back, but he didn't even know where to begin. Her capsule was still broken, and even though Ethan tried to fix it, the technology was far beyond anything he understood. It had strange symbols, glowing parts, and metal that didn't melt or bend easily. One day, while working on her capsule, Ethan said, "I'm sorry, Lyra, I'm trying. But this thing, it's not from here. I don't know how it works." Lyra placed her small hand on his finger and smiled gently. "Try good," she said, using the simple English words she had learned. "You good human." Those words made Ethan laugh softly. "You're a good alien," he replied, and she giggled at the sound of it. Their days were filled with small adventures. Lyra explored the garden, amazed by butterflies and flowers. She often rode on Ethan's shoulder when they went outside. Sometimes she would collect tiny stones and leaves, saying they reminded her of home. She was fascinated by water. Every time Ethan turned on the tap, she would watch the flowing stream with wonder. Once she even climbed onto the edge of a bowl full of water and tried to touch her reflection. "Another me," she said happily. Ethan smiled at her innocence. He started to realize how special she was, not just because she came from another world, but because of her heart. Despite being so small and far from home, she was full of curiosity, courage, and kindness. But their peaceful days also came with challenges. One afternoon, while Ethan was cleaning the house, he heard a knock on the door. It was his neighbor, Mr. Collins, an old man who liked to talk too much. "Hey, Ethan," he said with a friendly smile. "I saw some strange lights over your woods the other night. Everything okay out here?" Ethan froze for a moment, trying to act normal. "Yeah, must have been a meteor or something. Nothing serious." As they talked, Lyra peeked from behind the curtain, her glowing eyes just barely visible. Mr. Collins noticed the faint shimmer and frowned. "What was that? You got some kind of light toy in there?" Ethan quickly stepped in front of the window. "Oh, just a lamp reflection. I've been testing a few new bulbs," he said with a nervous laugh. The old man nodded slowly but looked suspicious. "Well, you be careful. Folks around here are saying strange things about the forest lately. Don't want trouble, you know." After he left, Ethan closed the door and leaned against it, breathing deeply. "That was close," he muttered. Lyra flew down from the curtain and looked at him curiously. "Bad?" she asked. Ethan smiled tiredly. "Not bad, just... we have to be careful. People wouldn't understand you, Lyra. They might try to take you away." She tilted her head. "Take me?" "Yeah," Ethan said softly. "Some humans get scared of what they don't know." Lyra looked thoughtful for a long moment. Then she said in her broken English, "Ethan, no scared." He smiled. "No, I'm not scared." Later that night, they sat outside watching the stars again. It had become their little tradition. Lyra would sit on Ethan's shoulder while he leaned back on the porch. The stars seemed brighter that night, and Lyra pointed to one particular cluster, whispering something in her own language. Ethan listened quietly, even though he didn't understand the words. Her voice was soft and full of emotion. After a while, she turned to him and said, "Ethan, star home." He nodded. "Yes, that's your home." She placed her small hand on his cheek, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "You Kai, friend," she said. It was such a simple word, but it meant everything. Ethan smiled warmly. "You're my friend too, Lyra." Over the next few days, they worked together to study her device. Lyra showed him how it could scan things and create small holograms. When she touched it to a flower, a tiny floating image of that flower appeared in the air. Ethan was amazed. "Your technology is like something from the future," he said. Lyra giggled. "Future funny word," she said. She had learned many English words by now. Sometimes she mixed them up, saying things like sky sleep when she meant night, but Ethan always understood what she meant. He never laughed to mock her. He always laughed kindly, helping her say it correctly. One evening, a thunderstorm rolled in. The thunder made Lyra jump every time it rumbled. She covered her ears and hid in her tiny box house. Ethan sat beside it and whispered, "It's just thunder, Lyra, it's not dangerous." But she looked up at him with frightened eyes. "Big sound, bad?" He shook his head gently. "No, it's just the sky making noise." He placed his hand beside her little shelter, and slowly she came out and sat on his palm. She was trembling, so he spoke softly. "See? You're safe." She relaxed a little, watching the rain hit the window. After a while, she looked up at him again. "Ethan safe too?" He nodded. "Yes, both safe." That small exchange filled Ethan's heart with warmth. He had never felt so connected to anyone before, not even other humans. Lyra's trust meant more than words could explain. As the days went on, she began to hum small tunes while working with her glowing device. The sounds were peaceful, almost like a lullaby. Ethan often listened quietly, amazed at how such a tiny being could make his whole world feel calmer. Each passing day made him realize something deeper. He wasn't just helping her survive. She was teaching him something too. She reminded him how beautiful simple things could be. The sound of rain, the light of stars, the feeling of being trusted. And though he knew she missed her home, Ethan couldn't help but hope that maybe, just maybe, she might stay a little longer. One calm morning, everything seemed peaceful as usual. The sun had just risen and a soft mist covered the grass outside. Lyra sat on the windowsill looking at the bright sky while Ethan cooked breakfast. She liked watching the steam rise from the pan. It reminded her of the strange clouds on her home planet. She was humming a soft tune in her own language when she suddenly stopped. Her small device, the one she always kept near her, began to blink faintly with blue light. It had been silent for weeks, but now it was glowing again. She gasped softly and tapped it. A stream of glowing symbols appeared in the air above it. Ethan turned around confused. "What is it?" he asked. Lyra looked at him, her face full of surprise and emotion. She pointed at the device and said, "Home. Call." Ethan blinked. "Home is calling you?" She nodded quickly. Her tiny hands shook a little as she touched the screen again. The device made soft sounds like singing notes. For the first time, Ethan saw something like hope in her eyes, but also worry. He leaned closer to see the hologram. It showed a map full of stars, with one blinking red dot far away. Lyra pointed at it and said, "Valora, family. Find me." Ethan felt both happy and sad at once. "That's great, Lyra," he said quietly. "They found you." She looked up at him, her eyes shining. "Need go. Sky." She pointed upward, then at her broken capsule in the corner. "Fix ship. Go home." Ethan understood what she meant. Her people could locate her only if her ship sent a strong signal back. The broken capsule had to work again. "I'll help you fix it," he said firmly. They spent the whole day trying to repair the small metallic capsule. Lyra guided him with gestures and words, pressing certain parts, showing him where to connect wires. The inside was full of glowing circuits like veins of light. Ethan was amazed by how she understood every part of it. She might be tiny, but she was incredibly smart. As evening came, the sky turned orange and the capsule's lights flickered weakly. Lyra touched a small button and the whole thing hummed softly. She smiled brightly, clapping her tiny hands. "And work!" she shouted with joy. Ethan laughed in relief. "You did it, Lyra." But their joy didn't last long. That same night, strange noises came from outside. Vehicles, footsteps, and people talking. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He looked out the window and saw flashing lights in the distance. Trucks and men in dark uniforms were moving through the forest. Lyra's smile faded instantly. "Human, come?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded grimly. "Yes, they're looking for something. Maybe your crash sent a signal." Lyra's small wings trembled. "They hurt?" He shook his head quickly. No, not if we hide you. But we have to move now." He turned off all the lights and carefully lifted Lyra, placing her inside his jacket pocket. "Stay quiet, okay? Don't make a sound." She nodded and hid deep inside, her heart beating fast. Ethan went out the back door, sneaking into the woods. The sound of soldiers and dogs echoed behind him. They were searching every part of the forest. His boots sank into the soft mud as he moved between trees, holding his breath whenever he heard someone nearby. "Over there," one of the soldiers shouted in the distance. Ethan ducked behind a large rock, clutching the small pocket where Lyra hid. He could feel her shaking. "It's okay," he whispered. "I've got you." After what felt like hours, the voices faded. Ethan finally reached a quiet clearing deep in the forest, the same place where he had first found her. The crater was still there, though covered with leaves now. Lyra peeked out from his pocket, her glowing eyes reflecting the moonlight. "Here," she said softly. "You're safe." Ethan set her down on a flat stone. "They won't stop searching," he said seriously. "You have to go before they find you." Lyra looked at the sky, then at him. Her device was blinking faster now. It was calling her ship. She pressed a few buttons, and the air above them shimmered faintly. A soft blue light appeared, coming down from the clouds. It looked peaceful, like a glowing waterfall of light. Ethan stepped back, shielding his eyes. "Is that your ride home?" Lyra nodded slowly. "Home come. Take me." But even as the light grew brighter, she didn't move toward it. She turned to Ethan, her face full of emotion. "You would save me. No eat, no scare. Friend?" she said in her soft voice. Ethan laughed through the lump in his throat. "I told you I don't eat aliens." She giggled faintly, but her eyes were wet. She reached out and placed her tiny hand on his finger. "Ethan Goodheart," she whispered. He bent down closer. "And you, Lyra, you changed mine." The sound of engines roared in the distance again. The soldiers were getting closer. Lyra looked up at the light. It was time. "Come," she said, holding out her hand as if asking him to come closer to the light with her. Ethan smiled sadly. "I can't go where you're going." Lyra's voice broke a little. "Ethan, alone?" He shook his head. "I'll be okay. I'll always look at the stars and remember you." The blue light grew stronger, wrapping around Lyra like a soft blanket. She started to rise slowly into the air. Her tiny figure glowed brighter and brighter. "Goodbye, Lyra," Ethan whispered. "Goodbye, friend," she replied, her voice echoing softly as she rose higher. Then in a blink the light vanished into the sky. The forest was silent again, as if nothing had happened. Ethan stood there for a long time, staring at the empty sky. He felt both proud and heartbroken. He had helped her go home, but it felt like he had lost a part of himself. When he finally walked back home, the soldiers were gone. The woods were quiet except for the gentle whisper of the wind. Inside his house, everything was still. The small box she used as her bed sat empty on the table. Her little device was gone too, except for one tiny crystal she must have left behind. It glowed faintly with a soft blue light. Ethan picked it up carefully and held it close to his heart. "Goodbye, little one," he murmured. That night he sat by the window and looked at the sky for hours. The stars seemed brighter than before, and one of them flickered gently just like Lyra's light. Ethan smiled sadly, whispering, "She made it." From that day on, Ethan kept the small blue crystal in a glass jar by his bedside. Whenever he felt lonely, he would look at it and remember the tiny alien girl who once thought he would eat her, but instead found a friend who showed her kindness and safety in a world far from her own. He didn't tell anyone about her, not even when the news showed reports of strange lights and unidentified activity in the forest. He kept her secret safe because it wasn't a story for the world, it was a memory for his heart. And every night before sleeping, he whispered softly, "Good night, Lyra. I hope you're home." Ethan ran through the dark forest, holding Lyra gently in his hands. The cold wind brushed against his face as dry leaves cracked under his boots. He could hear distant voices and the sound of engines somewhere behind him. The soldiers were searching every corner and time was running out. Lyra's tiny body trembled as she looked up at Ethan, her silver blue eyes full of worry. Her little energy crystal blinked faintly in her hands, showing a weak blue light that grew brighter with every second. She whispered softly, "They found me. My people are near." Ethan looked down at her and smiled sadly. "We just have to make it to the clearing." "You'll be safe then," he said in a calm voice, trying to hide his fear. The forest seemed endless. Every sound felt louder than before. The rustling trees, the distant barking of dogs, the shouting of men. Ethan moved quietly, hiding behind thick trees and fallen logs. Lyra stayed close to his chest, listening to his heartbeat. She had never felt this kind of care before. On her planet, everyone followed rules and orders, but Ethan had risked everything just to protect her. For the first time, she realized what trust truly meant. As they got closer to the old crash site, the light from Lyra's crystal grew stronger. It lit the dark path ahead, guiding them like a star. "Almost there," Ethan whispered. But just then a flashlight beam cut through the trees. "Who's there?" a soldier shouted. Ethan froze. He quickly hid behind a large rock and held his breath. Lyra covered her tiny mouth, afraid to make even the slightest sound. They waited as the soldier's light swept across the trees, then slowly faded away. Ethan exhaled softly and continued moving, step by step until the forest opened up into the clearing. The clearing looked different now. Burned patches of grass still marked the spot where her capsule had crashed. The night sky above was wide and filled with stars. Suddenly, a soft humming sound filled the air, deep and smooth like the sound of the ocean. Ethan looked up and saw a beam of light breaking through the clouds. It wasn't bright, but it had a calm blue glow that spread across the clearing. Lyra's crystal responded instantly, shining even more. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at Ethan. Home, she said quietly. Ethan nodded. You did it, Lyra. You're going home. But as the light came closer, the sound of engines returned behind them. Soldiers had found the trail. There, in the clearing, one of them shouted. Ethan turned, heart pounding. He knew if they caught them now, Lyra would never be free. Without thinking, he shielded her with his hand and ran straight toward the light. Go, he shouted, placing Lyra near the beam. They're coming, you have to go now. Lyra hesitated, her tiny face filled with conflict. She didn't want to leave him. Ethan smiled softly. You're safe now, Lyra, you have to go home. The light pulsed and the air around them shimmered. Lyra's small body began to lift slightly off the ground. She reached out and placed her tiny hand on Ethan's finger, her eyes wet with tears. No, eat me. Friend forever, she said with a trembling voice. Ethan laughed gently, even though his heart felt heavy. Friend forever, he repeated, trying to hold back his tears. In that short moment, everything was quiet. No soldiers, no fear, just two friends saying goodbye under the stars. The beam of light slowly rose higher, taking Lyra with it. Ethan watched as she floated upward, her small figure glowing softly. The soldiers arrived just moments later, aiming their lights everywhere, but they saw nothing except empty air and a fading glow in the sky. They shouted and searched, but there was no sign of Lyra or her pod. Ethan stood silently, staring upward until the last trace of blue light disappeared among the stars. When the soldiers questioned him, Ethan said nothing about her. He simply told them he had seen strange lights and then they were gone. After a few days, everything calmed down. The scientists left, the soldiers moved on, and life in the small town returned to normal. But for Ethan, nothing felt the same. Every night he would walk to the edge of the forest and look up at the sky, searching for that one bright star Lyra had pointed to so many times. Weeks turned into months and seasons changed. Ethan returned to his simple life, but he kept Lyra's tiny energy crystal, the one she had dropped before leaving. Sometimes it flickered faintly, as if responding to his thoughts. He took it as a sign, a small reminder that she was still out there somewhere thinking of him too. Whenever he felt lonely, he would hold the crystal close and whisper, "Friend forever." Years later, Ethan became known in town as the quiet man who loved to watch the stars. Children would often ask him why he stared at the sky every night. He would just smile and say, "Because someone very small and very brave lives up there." He never told them the full story, but in his heart he remembered every detail. The fear in her eyes when they first met, her laughter when she learned new words, and the warmth of her tiny hand on his finger. One night, many years later, Ethan saw something unusual in the sky. A brief flash of blue light just like the one from that night long ago. It blinked twice, then disappeared. Ethan smiled softly and whispered, "I see you, Lyra." He knew it was her way of saying she hadn't forgotten. The world would never know the truth about what happened in that forest, but Ethan didn't care. He had learned that kindness could reach even across the stars, and somewhere on a distant planet, a small alien girl named Lyra surely looked up at her own night sky, telling her people about the human who didn't eat her, but instead showed her what friendship really meant. That unexpected meeting between a human and a mini alien girl changed two lives forever. It proved that even when beings come from different worlds, hearts can still understand each other. It wasn't about size, fear, or language. It was about kindness, trust, and the courage to care for someone who needed it most. And though they lived in separate worlds, their bond remained unbroken, shining across the stars like a quiet promise that would never fade.